Well, good morning, everybody. It is Friday, and that means it's coffee chat time. And I am with my special guest, Libby Kahnke, with Find Your Light. And you are a psychic.
I am.
Yes, among other things. She's also a mother, a business owner.
I am.
A beautiful, beautiful soul. So I'm so interested in talking to you about this, especially around this time of year, Halloween and spirituality and all that fun stuff. And
kind of creepy, spooky
Yeah,
things.
exactly. So just give us a little bit of background of who you are.
Well, I started, I guess, my journey when I was really young. Because they always say, gifts, you see them in kids, and then time kind of, I don't know, makes it so they go away, essentially.
Yeah.
Social conventions, when a child says, I'm seeing a monster, we say, oh, you're not seeing a monster. It's okay, sweetheart. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what happened to me. And it wasn't until a few years ago, my whole life had basically been a mental health journey. I struggled a lot with depression and bipolar and those kinds of things. And a few years ago, I was making a very bad decision. And so I was asked to go get help. And I finally made it to a few people, actually, that actually framed it to me as, have you ever considered that you're not sick, you're just gifted? And I did, sort of, but again, social convention is like, oh no, I'm not that special or whatever. But then I started kind of digging really deep into that, and I realized that what was happening to me, a lot of it was psychic abilities. I'm a feeler, so I feel other people's energy, essentially, and not just a catching glimpse. It's feeling it, like in my soul. I feel other people's pain primarily. So with that, I realized, oh, well, I talk to a lot of people throughout the day, sad sack Sally in the morning. And
sad sack Sally.
But you know what I mean? Like when I talk to different people with different moods throughout the day, obviously that causes spikes in emotions, right? It's what bipolar looks like.
Oh, yeah. Because you're feeling the different. Okay, that makes sense.
And then, of course, I see. And so, there are people out there that might argue that that's schizophrenia or something like that. You know what I mean? Which that's never been one of my diagnoses. But,
right.
But anyway, and so I kind of got over the whole I'm sick thing and started looking at my gifts and kind of, fostering those, I guess. Because there's always two sides to a coin. When you feel other people's emotions, especially when it's sad emotions, that it's harmful for someone who feels sad emotions, right? But on the other side, I can feel other people's emotions so I can help them, and you know what I mean? So there's two sides, right? There's positive and there's kind of the non-so-positive.
Right.
I actually say non-beneficial.
Yes.
So, but anyway, and so I just kind of started cultivating that and realizing, okay, I have these abilities, so how do I control them? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So once I've kind of learned to control, like, I can decide whether or not I'm going to take on your pain or not. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense,
Because I know that I do that, so now I can decide whether I'm not or I'm going to. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I always kind of tell people that, a lot of times mental health issues, I guess, are kind of, they stem from psychic abilities, but we don't understand that it's happening to us because everybody has them, but we don't believe it. And so we
shut it off.
Yep. And we look at it and, from sort of like a mental health perspective and a sick perspective.
Okay.
And so when you kind of start to shift your perspective and realize, yeah, that's the really crappy part of having gifts. But on the other side, there's this really positive part, helping people and all of that.
Right.
And helping yourself too, so you just have to kind of learn to understand that you have them and then you can control them. Does that make sense?
It totally does. So if you are feeling these emotions and obviously you've learned to control, what is kind of your way of releasing from that
Okay.
Or taking a break, I guess.
So, I guess for me, it's understanding that it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's step one, right? Like, oh, I'm just feeling so blah. And then you kind of go throughout your day and think, oh, well, I talked to, or a lot of things happened that were kind of blah.
Right.
And not to say that it's an excuse, right? That other people are making me feel that way, because that's absolutely the wrong perspective.
Right.
But at least to sort of acknowledge that, oh, that's definitely a contribution, right? And then at that point, the recognition. But after that, you can decide, am I going to continue to allow this to make me feel bad?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I going to kind of, like you say, release it or let it go? Because a lot of times people, it bounces around in their head, like in interactions, say,
Yeah.
And so they're holding it, and then they get mad.
And they're just thinking about it over and over.
And
I've been there.
that means that you're still connected to that situation.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
And what I often tell people is redirect your thinking, right?
But how?
Exactly, but how? So I use gratitude.
Okay.
Start thinking about, because a lot of times people are, oh, there's nothing to be thankful for. That's wrong. There's always something in people's life to be thankful for.
Totally.
Whether it's people, whether it's, situations, there's always something to be grateful for in your life.
100%.
And what I often do is think about people, because, sometimes it's hard for me to sort of see my own world. And so I think about, oh, I'm so glad that person's in my life. And then what do they offer? Why am I glad, right? And then you kind of start to walk down that. And the positivity, it kind of lifts you, right? Like just being being grateful, it kind of lifts you and shifts your perspective a little bit. And then, of course, you start to kind of forget about
the other stuff.
Yeah, about the other stuff.
I like that a lot.
And it makes you look forward to all the other things in your life that that you're grateful for, I guess. And then you start to see, like, throughout your day, like, I'm so glad that this happened, or you know what I mean? It changes your perspective a little bit.
Right. Just putting a positive spin on maybe even that negative.
Absolutely. And I always tell people to go out into nature somehow.
Oh yeah.
Right. Billings, we are very fortunate to, even going downtown, right, with all the beautiful trees.
True.
I think of like Clark Avenue.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite.
And so, just taking a 5-minute walk, because what happens is we fester, right? We sit there and we let those thoughts bounce around in our head. And it kind of saturates our body because it's energy, right?
Yeah.
And so our body, we kind of get stagnant a little bit, especially when we just kind of sit there and just kind of let it happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Which is common. And so I tell people, go out into nature. And what that does is, first of all, it moves your body a little bit. I almost see it like a vacuum. Like when you start moving your body, it starts to kind of like spin that energy inside of you. Does that make sense? And the thing about nature is it's called transmutation. And I know it's kind of a weird word, but basically what it does is when you're out in nature, you're throwing your energy with every step. You're throwing negative energy into Mother Nature, right? And a lot of times you want to do it with intention.
Yeah.
Like throw my day into my feet through nature, right? And what she does is she takes it and she spins it, and then she tosses it back up to you as positive energy, right? So a transmutation is it's basically taking non-beneficial energy and spinning it almost in like a centrifuge.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then tosses it back up. And so what happens is 5 minutes in nature, you feel better, right? I don't think there's anybody...
That's true. I mean, it is true. Like
that doesn't feel better after a short walk, and that's the science.
Yeah.
And there's actually very sciencey, explanations for what happens, but that's sort of my energetic explanation, I guess.
No, that makes complete sense because, as you guys all know, I love going to Chico Hot Springs, and the reason I love going there is because there's no TVs in the room, and it's just a great way to reset. Like, when you're so busy and just go, 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 go.
Absolutely. Yeah. And think about how cleansing water is. They often say when you take a bath, because it's it's basically washing you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And Chico is hot springs, so it's from the earth, right?
Mineral
From the
and-
yep, exactly. And it's very detoxifying, in terms of physical and sort of that spiritual or energetic is usually what I say, an energetic cleansing.
Well, yeah, because you got the mountains and the
Yep.
fresh air.
Yep.
And, yeah. It's just
Absolutely.
my favorite.
Absolutely.
So did you take any classes to kind of harness, your natural abilities, or
So
have you just kind of?
I'm a reader,
Okay.
and I remember reading when I was young, like in my teenage sort of days, about like how to make your psychic gift stronger, right? But at that time, I never really bought into the idea. Like I wanted to.
Yeah.
I wanted to be psychic. Does that make sense? And I probably, the reason being, so interested in that was I probably knew, right? I knew on some level that my gifts are strong. And so I was really interested in it, but I didn't connect to it. So here's what I always tell people. Every single person has a different perspective, right? So when I would go to psychics, that was also part of my research, is talking to other psychics in town. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And what I realized was everyone doesn't see the world, like even with psychic gifts, the same. Does that make sense? So, books and Hollywood, and they kind of, make it seem like it's a physical manifestation. Like when I say that I see something, like people assume, because that's the only word we can really use,
Right.
that it's a physical manifestation that's in front of you, right? And that is definitely not how it is for me. I think for some people it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But for me, that's not how it is. It's almost like one little, like inch, not even an inch, like a really small, minuscule measurement, I guess, away from thought. It's not that different from your thoughts that buzz through your head. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Receiving message from me isn't that different. And so I always just thought, oh, I almost said the F-bomb.
That's okay. We're all adults here.
You're really messed up for having that thought, because sometimes I get really weird thoughts and dark thoughts, you know what I mean? And I see people in not so happy situations, and I'm like, what is wrong with you? You know what I mean? But then I realized, oh, that's message. That's what you know what I mean?
Yep.
And do you know what I mean when I say message?
Yeah, that's kind of basically
a generic term.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so in talking and doing research with other psychics, I realized that, well, there are a few that I see similarly. Does that make sense? There are a few where, like, oh, I don't see it like that at all. So I couldn't connect that we were seeing the same thing. It just looked different. Does that make sense?
Like a different vision.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. And almost sometimes a different perspective.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like physical perspective.
Okay.
But for the most part, it was really just figuring out how I saw things, how I perceive it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because when you read in books and you talk to other people and that kind of stuff, you see things differently, so you can't really like see it as the same thing. Does that make sense? When it is the same thing. So for me, it was literally just talking to tons of people and picking out similarities, I guess.
Sure.
And realizing, oh, that's what that is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You see it the same way as me. So that is message. Okay, I get it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It was really just researching,
Right.
and just talking with a lot of people and figuring out that's how I perceive the world.
Nice. So what would you say some misconceptions are of the word psychic, or you kind of that?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about this
Yeah.
a little bit. The word psychic, it very much pigeonholes people. It puts us in a box, and there's lots of, different, I guess, perceptions. Some people see it as a very spiritual thing. Sometimes it's religious. To me, spiritual and religious are different. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, from my perspective, it's a science kind of perspective. So But for the most part, people think, oh, she sees dead people, or, people who have passed, right?
Yeah.
Which is something I can do. However, I don't really like it. It's a different world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're essentially going to a different world, and I don't navigate that world well.
Right.
And so, but anyway, people
You're not doing seances.
Right, yes, and people assume that too, right? It's
right.
these assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And people also, assume like a clairvoyant, like someone can see, and then I think people understand being an empath, which is the feeling, right?
Right.
And of course, we have names for each of these so-called gifts, but what people don't realize is, there's like variables within that. Does that make sense? So, like, I'm, I guess, clairvoyant, right? But I'm also a feeler. I also sometimes smell, which is weird.
Oh.
I know one other person, and she's actually the one that brought it to my attention that, that is what is happening. I'm smelling that.
Like,
right?
you're smelling something that's not actually there?
Yes, correct.
Oh, interesting.
Or sometimes it's a memory.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm reading someone, I can sort of see memories. Does that make sense? Like little snippets of their life.
Right.
And sometimes I'll pick up a smell, like, oh, I'm smelling, vanilla and amber. And they're like, oh shit, that's what my grandmother wore.
Oh,
or,
wow.
you know what I mean?
Sure.
So but what's interesting about that is because people have this box, this pigeonhole perspective, they don't realize that they too, because like I said, everyone, humans are innately wired to be psychic, right? It's part of our genetics. It's part of our being. But we get inside of this box and we can't see that even though that is what's happening, we don't think it is, or we have sort of doubt. Doubt is the enemy of gifts.
Yes, absolutely. Well, a lot of times, I mean, we have intuition, right? That gut feeling,
right?
That, okay, I shouldn't be here, or I shouldn't be doing this, and a lot of times we dismiss it or ignore it, and then all of a sudden something happens. Or
so that's a psychic gift, or a lot. This happens all the time. I actually am getting goosebumps, but when you're thinking of a friend and you message them and say, oh, I'm thinking of you today, I hope everything's well. And they say, oh my gosh, I was just thinking of you and I'm having a really shitty day. Can you help me? Right?
Yeah.
That right there is it's basically you guys are finding each other in the ethereal world or the energetic world and you're feeling each other. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And so those are not serendipitous moments. I mean, they seem like that and they feel sort of miraculous. But it's really just psychic gifts in action.
Interesting. That is very interesting. So, like, if someone wanted to come and talk to you, what would a session look like?
So, there's sort of a few things. When someone contacts me, I always remind them prior to the appointment. And I always let them know to be thinking about the session. Like, what do they want out of it? Or what questions do they have, right? Because people always do.
Right.
And I don't want them to ask me.
Yeah.
I would just want them to be thinking about it.
Sure.
And the way that I describe it is it sort of sends up like an antenna. Because actually psychic gifts are kind of like that, like a radio frequency, right? So someone shoots up their intention, like questions, because they're thinking about me even though they've never met me, right?
Right.
And so it's almost like a beacon, like doot, 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 doot. And then I can find them. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because of course there's a lot of stuff, right? Like sometimes I'll be talking to someone and they're like, no, that didn't happen to me. That happened to my mom. Or does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of find them. It's not like they're tuning into the right frequency. Does that make sense?
I don't
like
think
the radio.
anybody will want to tune into my frequency.
That's absolutely not true.
I got a lot going on in there. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
I would say ADD. Go ahead.
But what I do, and so when they come in, it's just a brief, conversation.
Sure.
And usually I just basically go right into, well, this is what I'm feeling or seeing or, whatever.
Okay.
And I don't recall any instances when someone said, oh no, that's
really
wrong.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love to amaze people to a certain degree. But the reason that I love that is so that they start to see the world in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not special for having psychic gifts. I'm special because the ones that I have are unique. And, you know, I always tell people, if you're not feeling special, just think about the history of mankind. There's never been a Billy, ever, in the way, right, though? There never was, there never and there never will be. And you are special because you're here right now as the beautiful person that you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is.
And
that
stop
is
being such a turkey.
That is something that you gotta do every once in a while. That you are just you, and that's you're only here for a little bit.
And the way that I talk to people too is, we want to put judgment. You know, like, I'm always late. Not always, but my concept of time is different than some people's, right? So I all of a sudden it's that time. But anyway, and I used to be super hard on myself, like, oh, you're so this and that and the other, right? But again, there's always, you know, another side to that. It's that I'm kind of relaxed, you know. I tend to just sort of flow throughout my day. And by the way, I do work on it because, you know, when it comes to like structure, my appointments, you know, things like that, like things that I guess have the utmost importance, of course I'll be on time for, but that's not even the point.
Right.
The whole point is there's always good and bad to a trait. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And so when we focus on the bad, and we are our own critics.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
big time.
You know, something that you may not like about yourself, 99.9% of the population doesn't see it that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if they know, like, oh, Libby's a little flighty, it can be endearing, right?
Right.
But it's how you look at it. It can be annoying or endearing, you know? But, you know, we put so much judgment, like, on ourselves. I don't even really know where I was going with that. But don't do that. You know, we have to have grace with ourselves.
You do. And that's something that I have a hard time.
I know, which is so, see, and this is one of those examples of, I don't understand why you would think anything but wonderful things about yourself, right? Because I see you as, you know, I even told you, I feel like you're almost this, like, you're bubbling over sometimes with positivity, and your energy is really loud, right? But not, I mean, some people might see it negatively, you know, and it might be grating to some people, but most people feel your warmth and your sunshine, and I think that there's probably everyone out here watching will agree with me that you're effing delightful.
Oh.
And
stop. What do you guys think? Am I on the annoying or am I delightful?
And it depends on the day, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like we were talking about your husband,
yes,
right?
Yes. So he's more of that kind of, I would say more of like an empath, because like he can feel energy, and sometimes he's just like, girl, you're too much.
Right.
Like, you're way too much. I just want to chill. And, you know, because he's more relaxed, I'm just like, let's go, let's do this, let's, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Blah, 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 blah. Like, my mind is just constantly going.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's good things to that, but there's also, you probably get really tired.
I do.
And, you know, things like that, because your mind is always buzzing. And I see it almost like as a blender.
Yeah.
Like, you have, like, and just the thoughts are just spinning around your head.
Yeah,
but
they are. That I like that analogy. The blender. How do I stop the blender or slow it down?
Go for a walk.
There you go.
And that's the thing. You can't just say don't think.
Yeah.
Because don't think of a black cat, right?
Because then you're gonna think of the black cat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the key is not to stop what you're doing. It's to start doing something different. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
So, you know, and I don't have the answer for you in terms of that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's, well, you know, a walk doesn't necessarily, it always helps, but it's not the answer for everyone. I don't see you as someone who can sit and meditate, but I see you as someone who can run and meditate. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That is basically what my meditation is.
Right.
Running. Yeah. I've tried to do, I like yoga, but then I sit there and it just, my brain just will not.
And what works for others might not work for you. You know what I mean? And and that's what I often tell people. Like, meditation doesn't have to be, you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't. it doesn't have to be that for you. And you're definitely not one of those people that I think you can, because you're bubbling over.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You need to, you're a mover.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely am a mover. Maybe mover too much. It's a little too much movement.
See, judgment.
I know. See, I just did it. Who's watching? Hi, Raymond. He says, hi, Billy. Who says something? You're always a ray of sunshine. Who says that? Who says that? I don't know who said that. There's a lot of people watching. Thanks for watching, everybody. And if you guys have any questions for Libby as we're talking, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll just keep an eye on it if you have any questions. So, like, what would you say typically when people come, they make that phone call to see you? What's their biggest question? I guess maybe that's a hard question to ask, but
no, it isn't. So I'm a really strong believer that people are attracted to us for certain reasons, right? And I find, because I do get some medium calls, right? So that's kind of big, but I usually send them to a dear friend of mine, because she's an amazing medium. That's her forte, right? And people are attracted to us for different reasons. You know, people generally don't come to me because, I don't project sort of the medium vibe.
And so what is a medium?
A medium is someone who reads people who have passed.
Okay, gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yes. That's kind of what I thought, but I wanted to just clarify that for some people that might not know.
But I find that most of my clients are attracted to me probably because they're in pain. But most of it, I find that it's sort of a purpose pain. They're in pain because they feel like they're here for no reason. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Or, it's usually helping people realize that they're amazing in their own way. And that judgment that I was talking about, helping people to sort of, I always say to give the finger to whatever voice is telling you that.
I like that. Yeah.
Does that make sense? But we have to acknowledge, because a lot of times we go into autopilot and let that sort of critic voice kind of take over. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so we just autopilot. Yeah, whatever. I'm a piece of whatever. You know what I mean? We just autopilot it. And what I try to do is encourage people to notice it, acknowledge it, and then give it the finger, essentially, and ignore it because it's a lie, and realize how fabulous they are.
Does
that make sense?
Yeah.
So I work with a lot of people who are probably going through things, but it's usually internal.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Probably past trauma. And
yes, yes. So that I'm finding is sort of my niche. You know, I work with people that need encouragement or need hope. I think. And I'm finding other gifts in myself as well, that when someone comes into my office and they leave, it's a different person.
Really?
Yeah. And so I don't know necessarily, I can't explain it, sorry. I don't really know what I do, that you know what I mean?
I bring out the positivity.
Yeah, I do. Because I think I'm a transmuter to a certain degree. I'm the ultimate spinner in terms of, if someone gives me a negative statement, I can spin it back and say the same thing, but in a positive way.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think I do that to a certain degree for people as well. Because I don't know what it is. And I'm not trying to brag.
No.
I'm just saying it's
and
they
you're
always
confident
feel better.
and know what you're doing is working.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And my perspective is different too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because somebody might be just thinking this whole thing, and then you turn it whoa, I didn't even think of it that way.
Right.
Which some people just need that.
Yep, exactly. That's what it is. And I'm really good at showing people, because one thing I try to do, which we talked about, is show people what gifts look like in real life, right?
Yeah.
And so, because it's not Hollywood, and it sort of expands that box a little bit, well, that's actually a psychic gift, you know what I mean? And showing people, I don't know, their own gifts.
Yeah. Which we all have them.
We do.
Ooh, did someone ask a question? Hey, Billy, I see you sitting off on my road. Oh, hi, Ahmed. Let's see if anybody has any questions. Doesn't look like any questions. But hi, Ahmed. Thanks for watching before you hit the road. Be safe. That's awesome. So, I think, we've talked about pretty much. So where would people find you if they wanted to look you up or book a session? What would be the easiest way to do that?
So my Facebook page is Libby Kahnke, Intuitive Counselor, and it's Kahnke. My website address is findyourlightmt.com.
Okay.
And usually just messaging me, or you could call me, or actually text me is probably better. 406-899-8076.
And I'll put all that information down in the chat too.
Cool.
And you're also on Instagram too.
I am. I forget about that.
Yeah. So I tagged you on Instagram.
Yep. It's Find Your Light MT on Instagram as well.
Yep.
So
awesome.
Yep.
So what was my question? Do you feel, that's going to be kind of a weird question.
Okay.
Do you feel that social media, like how big social media has become, do you think that's kind of hurting people in a way where making them more depressed because they're comparing themselves? Like,
so there's lots of things going on with that. First of all, think about what you see a lot on Facebook. It tends to be political.
Yes.
It tends to be political. It tends
pretty
to
much lately.
Right. It tends to just kind of be non-beneficial.
Yeah.
Negative, non-beneficial, right?
Right.
It's just not really. But what I've noticed is things that are inspiring. Most of the time, you don't see those things. Like people that have, wellness pages, spiritual pages. Things that are going to help lift people. Though in the algorithms, those aren't seen. They have to pay to be seen. Gotcha. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And that's what I'm noticing.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happens is we tend to see the negative stuff, right? And that has an effect on us, right? That's what we're seeing all day, especially people. Yep. And that's why I encourage people to not zone out on Facebook, because you're zoning out sort of to negative energy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
And not to say that everyone, because I like your post, right? It's probably why you have such successful posts, because they're happy and funny and inspiring. You know what I mean? but that's part of your gift, right? That's your judgment. But again, it's something beautiful that you're putting things out that make people smile, and how beautiful is that?
Thank
right?
you. Well, I'm hoping I'm making people at least chuckle.
Right. So, that's sort of my Facebook thing.
Yeah.
And of course I'm on Facebook, but
it's hard not to be.
It is.
I've tried to cut it off, but especially with my business, and I'm sure that you're the same. That's how you connect with people, right? So
it's kind of today's. Because I even think about, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of advertising, how different that looked in comparison to now. You know what I mean? So, and again, there's positive and negative about it, right? There's lots of really great things about Facebook. I use it to keep in touch with family across the United States and around the world,
Right.
But then there's also the not so good stuff.
It's just cutting it down and balancing.
Yeah, it really is. And you have to kind of decide, I know for me, if there's things that I'm constantly seeing, like a person specifically, I won't unfriend them per se, but I might unfollow them, because most of what they're putting out isn't something that I care to know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or I don't want, because it sticks.
Yes.
And you can protect yourself all you want, but some things are still going to get through. You're still going to feel it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We just don't have time for negative energy.
Right. So, I usually, I'm part of a lot of painting pages.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah.
Nice.
So, I see a lot of art.
Like painting pages, like artist pages?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Well, because I paint and draw and stuff like that, too.
Nice.
So,
awesome.
That's definitely something that I love. And I have lots to say about artists and channeling, but I don't know if we'll have enough time.
Like as far as what they put into their art?
Yeah, the way that I see art is, so I think we all probably have something where we zone out and forget about time, right?
Dancing.
You can be dancing for 4 hours and it feels like 45 minutes has gone by, or not even, right? And you're like, what? I need to cook you dinner? Are you kidding me?
Oh, I forgot I had a family.
Right. And you're channeling. So what you're doing is you're channeling from wherever, right? The angelic realm, whatever, the universe. But you're channeling energy, and you're moving your body in a way that's beautiful, right? So you're actually channeling, and then it's moving through you, and you're throwing it out to us that we get to see, which is beautiful, right? You're pulling angelic energy, and you're making something with your body to gift to us. Does that make sense?
That's a way to look at it.
But that's the way, like artists, painters, right?
Right.
They're pulling from the angelic realm. It's moving through them, and they throw it down on paper, and then we get to experience that.
That's
so
cool.
it's a gift.
See?
Does that make sense?
That's a great perspective to
right.
look at it like that. Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome.
So
when you were talking about that, for some reason I was thinking about horoscopes and like, what is your thoughts on that? Like if you're a Scorpio versus an Aries, do you think that comes into play with personality?
Yes. But I look at it a little differently.
Okay.
So the way that I see it is, our universe is all made up of energy, right? And that's what I talk about frequently.
Yeah.
And so when you think about, the planets moving and that kind of stuff, depending on where they are, that's going to cast off a different kind of energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's variables. And so for me, horoscope it's not that it defines that person, right? But based on the energy that was expelled during the time of their birth, it's likely that they're going to have certain traits. Does that make sense? Because with me, sometimes I will see like the same metaphor, the same symbol for two totally different people.
Oh.
Right? But what will happen is it's almost like so Libby, this person is like this, or they have these traits. And then from that trait, you can say, well, they're likely to make this decision.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you're a very, high vibing kind of person. You're kind of, buzzing, right? And so you can kind of know what sort of decisions you're going to make based on your personality. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
But I just sort of see it as variables in energy. You know what I mean? And, when the moon's full, right? It's proven that things happen during a full moon. And,
yes.
And in good, bad, or ugly, right?
Right.
But the whole thing is the energy is different then because, the gravitational pull and tides and, you could go into like all of the science, but the premise is it's a little different at that time. And what happens is this usually. Does that make sense? Like this frequently happens around full moons. Crime happens.
It does. Like 911 calls go up through the roof. Yeah.
Kids are weird. Dogs are weird. People are weird. Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know that I could explain it to you.
Yeah, like why that is.
Right, in a perfect way. But I think we can all sort of acknowledge that does happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Do you do, because I've tried this recently, like the moon water, like where you put the water out and you put the crystals on during the full moon? And...
I have done that. I don't know. That's a little... It's not that I don't buy into that, right? Because I do, but it's the same thing with meditation. That doesn't connect, I don't connect to sort of those rituals, right? And not to dismiss anyone who does because it works for them, right? Yeah. But for me, I don't connect to it.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I tried it a couple times and then I was like, and then I just...
Well, and that's the thing too is people assume that something magical is going to happen, right? And so when something, and that's the thing too about like message and the spirit world is it's pretty subtle most of the time. Yeah. And it's almost like a whisper, right? Especially when you have loud critics.
Yes.
Right? So it's hard to sort of hear the subtlety or the whisper through the loudness. Yeah. Does that make sense? And so, if something very small and subtle happened because you did that,
I didn't even notice.
You probably didn't notice it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
because you wanted a full-blown magical spell to happen.
I wanted to lose like 5 pounds.
Right. Exactly. Overnight. Yes. So yeah, that's the thing too is, oftentimes people think that the spirit world is big and loud and, you know, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's quiet and subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that we have meditation and things like that to quiet the mind is that we have to quiet the mind in order to hear it.
Yeah, and that's the hard part.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So,
was there anything else that you want them to know before we end our session?
just know that, you know, everyone on this planet has psychic gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would encourage people to sort of look outside that box, you know, talk to people and start to, you know, pick out sort of the things that you see in others, and then start to relate them to yourself, because you're amazing and no one, you know, there's not been,
There's only one you.
there's only one you. And to have gratitude, right?
Yeah,
Show
amazing.
gratitude. You know, we're moving into November, right? Giving thanks.
Yep.
And of course, don't just do it in November.
Do it every day.
Do it every day. But gratitude is definitely a way to brighten lives.
Yeah. I love it.
So,
I love it. Thank you so
Cool.
much for
Thank you
sitting
for
with
having
me. This
me.
is so. See, I love this. It's just so interesting to me because I met you a couple weeks ago
Uh-huh.
when we interviewed you and your husband,
yeah.
and you were talking about what you do, and I was just like amazed. I'm like, I'm so interested. So thank you for sitting
Thank
with me
you.
and talking about what you do, and
Awesome.
I love it. So yeah. So if you're interested in sitting down and chatting with Libby, just hit her up. I will put all her information in the chats. And thanks again.
Awesome.
And
Thank
happy
you.
Halloween, everybody.
Yeah,
It's
happy Halloween. Be
coming
safe.
up on Sunday. What are you gonna dress up as? Do you dress up?
I'm a witch. How funny,
Ooh,
right?
Fun. Yes, I love it. I love the witch because it's just so traditional.
It is.
And like,
But I
you
got-
can't go wrong with a witch.
You know those like modern, cute, like witchy hats?
Yes.
Like the wool ones? I got one
Yes.
of those.
Oh,
And
nice.
so I think I'm going to be like a modern
I love it.
witch.
I love it.
You know. And my daughter is a vampire bat.
A vampire bat.
Yes.
I love it.
And we're going to see if we can get Craig, my husband, to dress up. I bought him, it's a 3-piece suit. It's like a suit,
Yeah.
but it's a skeleton.
Oh.
So he's going to like look kind of like
Yeah.
a PIMP skeleton. You know what I mean?
Okay, I have to see that. So if you
Totally.
you gotta post
I'm getting
it on
pictures.
Facebook.
Yes, I am.
And Craig, if you're watching, you got to do it. It's Halloween, right?
He's gonna let me paint his face, I think.
Oh my gosh, that's
gonna be fun.
awesome. I
Yeah.
know my husband hates Halloween. I always
Mhm.
try to get him to dress up. I'm like, come on, you're dressing up. He's like, I'm not doing it. And then he ends up putting something on. I'm like, I knew it.
Yep. Last year, Craig was Cloud Guy from Trolls.
Oh yeah. Oh, funny.
It was
I can
funny.
totally see that.
It was
That's
funny.
awesome.
So
Well, I'm gonna be Cruella DeVille.
awesome. I used to have a
Yes.
dress that was black and white.
Oh,
it was
nice.
split, and it was really cute. And I
That's-
thought of you on it. I don't own it anymore. I got rid of it.
I know. I just kind of been piecing my costume together. So,
Cool.
just make sure nobody else has any questions before we go. Okay, awesome. Well, hey guys, thanks so much for watching, and again, thanks Libby.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, have a happy Halloween, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.